Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here, everyone. I'm Chingy Chen. I'm faculty in the Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, Bothell. And I'm really excited today to hear from and have a talk with Kim Kelly as part of the University of Washington Bothell Labor Colloquium. I'm just looking and admitting folks as we speak. And before we get started, we'll just say some logistics. We're going to ask everyone to please mute during the talk. And if you forget to mute and have a lot of background noise, we might mute you directly. And if you have any tech or access needs, our access and tech needs support person today will be our graduate assistant, Kat Huber, who has renamed herself as that, so you can easily find her. So please feel free to message Kat or me directly in the chat, not our guest speaker today. And I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Labor Solidarity Project, and our Labor Stories During Pandemic Times class. And then Dr. Laram's institutions class is also joining us today. And my colleagues from the UW Labor Bothell Colloquium, and then the Labor Stories During Pandemic Times class, which is my class, and from the Convergence Zone Reading Series and the Harry Bridges Center. And then this talk is being recorded and will be available later in our archive. And after the talk, we're going to open up to a bit of conversation with the audience, which I'm going to moderate. And so if you have questions to pose, please direct message Kat, and then we will curate them and pose them to our guest writer. We may not pose all of them, but our goal is to have a lively and interesting conversation. And the chat is also going to be open if you have respectful comments and conversation. So we are Zooming from different places, but this event is hosted by UW Bothell, which was built upon the unceded homeland of the Willow Sammamish people. Our campus also touches on the shared waters of tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. In addition, this place has been shaped by the labor of Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino laborers who built rail lines and worked in crop fields, logging camps, and salmon canneries, and African-American workers who worked in shipyards. And what this means for me as an educator and writer living in this region is to commit to learning about the history and culture of these communities, to show solidarity for the continued fight for Indigenous sovereignty, and to work on decolonizing our educational practices. And for me, that includes whose histories, whose stories, and whose lineages we are centering in our writing practices and education. And part of that work for me is engaging with writers and artists and thinkers who are coming to talk with us in the series, including our guest today, Kim Kelly. I just want to encourage our audience to consider how you can individually and communally contribute to this work in a meaningful way to you. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our guest for today. Kim Kelly is an independent journalist, author, and organizer. She has been a regular labor columnist for Teen Vogue since 2018, and her writing on labor, class, politics, and culture has appeared in the New Republic, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Baffler, the Nation, the Columbia Journalism Review, and Esquire, among many others. Kelly has also worked as a video correspondent for More Perfect Union, the Real News Network, and Means TV, and also previously was the heavy metal editor at Noisey, Vice's musical vertical, and was an original member of the Vice Union. All really fascinating, and hopefully we'll get to dive into that in the conversation. A third generation union member, she is a member of the Industrial Workers of the World's Freelance Journalists Union, as well as a member and elected councilperson for the Writers Guild of America East. She was born in the heart of the South Jersey Pine Barrens and currently lives in Philadelphia with a hardworking man, a couple of taxidermied bears, and way too many books. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank Thank you so much, man. That bio was wild. I gotta do something about that. Um, hey, thank you so much, Dr. C. Man, as I was telling them, but when we're doing the tech check, I'm so jealous of y'all for getting to take classes like this and engage in these conversations and this kind of study. It's not something that I ever really had an opportunity to do because I got interested in labor and labor history and all of the stuff that kind of consumes my life now a little later on after I kind of built an entire life and career in the heavy metal world, which is, why I look like this. So I made a little bit of a hard pivot in like 2015 when I was working at Vice. I was the heavy metal editor there for like altogether about 5 years. And basically, first when I got there, a couple of my coworkers pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, we're thinking about unionizing." And this was kind of a big deal in 2015 because that wasn't, this is like Gawker was the first one who had gone public. But before that, digital media was not a unionized workforce. We were just kind of out here fighting for our lives, making nothing, living in Brooklyn, trying to survive while Shane Smith and, digital media billionaires were out buying the Entourage house. So when my coworkers pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we're thinking about organizing," I was super stoked. I got very involved very quickly. I was in every meeting, every committee, every bargaining session, which ranged from being really satisfying to absolute torture, as anyone who has bargained a union contract knows. But that experience really kind of changed my life in first material ways because it got me a raise. It improved our working conditions. It showed very clearly the power of a union, the power of collective bargaining and of workers coming together in solidarity. And it also kind of gave me a little bit of license to go and pursue writing about these subjects that had always sort of interested me as a history nerd, as someone from a rural working class kind of isolated background who didn't grow up with a lot of resources or whatever. I had always been interested in that history, people's history, but I didn't think that I, as a heavy metal journalist, heavy metal promoter, heavy metal like tour person, I had any right to write about it. I felt like I didn't have any credibility, even if I was really interested and was passionate. It was only after organizing myself and getting to know organizers intimately, getting to see what that process was like, bargaining, learning about labor law, being part of something that was part of the movement, that made me feel like, okay, maybe I can try this. Maybe I am allowed to write about this. Maybe my voice does matter. And basically, as I was freelancing the whole time because Vice wasn't paying me nothing, and you got to hustle to survive in the digital media industry, the media industry in general. But I was always freelancing, and basically I went and started pitching Teen Vogue purely because I heard that they paid okay, and it seemed like the editor might be receptive. That's kind of what it came down to. That's like the freelancers kind of creed, like, oh, they might email me back, they pay a little bit, I'm gonna try it. And I tried it, and they started letting me write more about labor, and that turned into a column, and that kind of somehow turned into a book. I never thought that my first book would be a people's labor history. I thought it would be about metal, but that's not how it shook out. And I'm really glad that it shook out the way it did because I'm really excited about this book. I'm really proud of it. Put a lot of work into it. And it seems like, it's only been out for a couple of weeks, but it seems like it's landing with the people that I wanted to reach. I wrote this book for, it's going to sound hokey, I wrote it for the people, right? I wrote it for workers, for the rank and file. My initial thought when I sat down and started typing was like, okay, I'm gonna write something that people can stick in their pocket on their way to a protest or a picket line. But then after I dove into it and started writing like a lot, I realized that this is more of a backpack size situation. But regardless, the way that it's structured, the way that I went into it, the way that I just approached the whole thing was to make it as accessible and approachable as possible. Because, I've read a ton of labor books and a ton of history books, and I'm in absolute awe of the work that archivists and historians and academic researchers and all of these brilliant people that pour so much time and labor into preserving and unearthing these stories. But it's not necessarily work that is always accessible to everyone, whether that means that it's in an academic library, an academic journal, it's behind a paywall. It's not as easy for folks to just pick up whenever they want. It's not going to jump out at people unless they know what they're looking for and they're already committed to the study of this history and they have a little bit of a basis in it. I wanted to write a book that would pull people in who maybe just happen to walk by a used bookstore on their way to work or stop by Barnes and Noble with their kids on the weekend and see something that, it's kind of a bright kind of goth cover, see something that jumps out to them. and pick it up and see themselves within the pages. That's the most important thing to me. Like, I grew up in a union family. I was raised by construction workers and steel workers. There's a teacher or two in there, but the idea of the union that I grew up with is very, very basic, very much that avatar of like the burly white guy in a hard hat who worked with his hands, who had some pretty bad opinions about politics, but stuck with the union. Like, that's where I'm from. And that is such a prevailing avatar of union members and of the working class in general in this country. And obviously, those of us who don't fit into that box know very well that is not the whole story. But I wanted to write something that showed very clearly, like, yes, shout out to the burly white guys. We love some of them. Thank you for your service. But everyone else has been here the whole time too. And that's why I wanted to write a book that focused explicitly on women and queer and trans workers, Black, Brown, Indigenous workers, Asian and Pacific Islander workers, sex workers, disabled workers, incarcerated workers, undocumented workers, workers whose labor has been criminalized or who have been marginalized and just sort of kept out of the mainstream narrative for whatever reason. And I wanted to sort of collect those stories in a way and organize them and tie them all together in ways that show just how deep these intersections run and just how important the contributions of those workers has been, even if they don't get top billing in mainstream history books or in, the kind of history classes I took in high school, which I feel like they taught us about the Civil War twice and that was about it. And I don't think I got great information on that. I only found out how little I had really been given in terms of people's history, or even just accurate American history when I got out of high school and I got access to libraries in a city and different kinds of people and realized like, oh, there's a lot they didn't tell me. Let me start buying some books and educating myself, because that wasn't the education that was offered to me in my, rural 99% white South Jersey educational sphere. Like there's a lot that gets left out. And I'm hoping that this book will reach people who grew up the way I did and people that grew up entirely different ways than I did. Like, it sounds a little hokey, but I really did write it for everyone. And I'm, like I said something on Twitter earlier when I logged in, like, I'm always a little bit nervous talking to folks in academia and students and university, like you guys, because I don't necessarily have that same kind of background. I went to college, didn't finish, would like to come back someday and learn some more cool stuff, but it's not that easy, right? And as a journalist, I've kind of taught myself everything I know and have, benefited. And I'm so grateful to the teachers I found, the peers and comrades and academics and journalists and just all the people that I've kind of come across who have taken pity and shown me the ropes in certain ways. But not everyone's lucky enough to have someone show them the ropes or teach them about who they are or show them what they're capable of. So my hope with this book is to show people, especially those who have been made to feel like they're not powerless or they're not valued or they don't have, they don't have an opportunity to make themselves heard. I want to make it very clear that no matter what's going on right now, like, you are not alone. You are part of this long, incredible legacy of people just like you who have moved mountains and toppled tyrants and who are behind the majority, if not all, of the steps towards progress that have been made in this country. And it's something to be proud of, and it's something to take inspiration in and to find like a motivating force in, right? Like, my hope, and this is a little bit grandiose, right? It's just a book, but my hope is that somebody will pick this up and read it and have someone stand out to them and think to themselves, well, if this person who had every odd stacked against them, they organized, they won, they did something, maybe I can talk to my coworkers about pay disparities I've noticed. Maybe we can confront our boss. Maybe we can call a union organizer. Maybe we can do something too. Like, maybe this is something that we can be a part of. Maybe the labor movement does include people like me. And that's the goal, right? It is just a book. It's my first book, my first shot. I never really thought I would get a chance to write a book because people that grew up the way I did don't really leave their hometowns and don't really get to work with big publishers and get to talk to brilliant university students across the country. I'm very cognizant of how lucky and privileged I am to have this opportunity. And I'm I'm just glad I was able to spend so much time digging into all of these histories and these people and bringing some characters to life that I think people should really know more about. Not just because they're inspiring, some of them were really flawed. Like there's some folks you'll meet in the book who I respect very deeply, but who made pretty awful decisions or who had pretty, I'm trying not to curse, screwed up opinions or viewpoints. Because that's one thing about the labor movement that's always important to bear in mind is that we are not a monolith, right? The labor movement is made up of people, and people are flawed, some more so than others. And that's kind of been a through line that you'll see throughout the book, is that not only are the bosses not on our side, sometimes throughout history, labor leadership or fellow union members or fellow workers have also participated in discrimination and xenophobia, racism, transphobia, homophobia, misogyny, every possible type of oppression a human being can visit upon one another. Like that's happened in the movement. Like whether it was the AFL in the 1800s supporting the Chinese Exclusion Act, or later coming out against the Bracero program, trying to keep, the first wave of Mexican guest workers from coming in and getting involved in the agricultural industry. There was this pervasive idea that I'm sure folks are still familiar with because it's never gone away. The idea that some other kind of person is coming here to take our jobs. Like that's a common right-wing talking point, but that's also something we've seen coming from labor. And the R in that instance is taking our members' jobs. And that is such a flawed and harmful way to view it, always has been, still is, because that just weakens the movement and weakens the cause and harms workers across the board. Because if you approach that situation with that viewpoint of, oh, we need to keep these people out to protect our members, that is a massive missed opportunity to organize new members and bring in more people and make everyone stronger. That is kind of the biggest lesson, if there's a couple that I try to hit in there, but the biggest lesson, biggest message of Fight Like Hell that I hope people walk away with is that solidarity is our greatest weapon, right? We are always stronger together. And I know that sounds a little bit like a Hallmark card or like something you hear in a union meeting, but that's because it's true. That's because it works. Like and we're seeing that happen within like this current organizing wave that's got people really fired up. Amazon and Starbucks are like kind of the big ones right now because they're, household names. Most people have interacted with them in some way. Most people know that those massive corporations have a lot of money and a lot of power. And seeing those workers rise up against them and organize and win has been an incredibly like galvanizing. It's just been really cool to see. Like labor, especially organized labor, is not necessarily used to winning. Like, I think probably for my entire lifetime, we've kind of been on the back foot. So seeing these workers take on massive corporations and fire these shots across the bow and win is incredible enough. But the fact that it's being led by young queer and trans workers, by Black and brown workers, by marginalized workers of every stripe, like that is the face of the labor movement right now. And that's how it should be, because those are the folks who have always fought the hardest. And you can draw a direct line from the work that Amazon Labor Union with Derek Palmer and Chris Smalls, Angelica McDonald, all of those folks who were involved in that organizing committee who won that first incredible victory at Staten Island. The same organizing tactics they were using, we've seen throughout history in other successful moments. Like I always love to talk about the 1946 sugar strike in Hawaii, because it's just such a perfect example of what happens when workers are able to overcome these divisions that the bosses try and foment between us and really give them hell together. 1946, at that point, the agricultural economy of the Hawaiian Islands was predominantly dependent on sugarcane, these massive sugarcane plantations that were owned by white guys who lived in the mainland and were worked by native Hawaiians and Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Puerto Rican immigrants from all over the place, right? But it was a predominantly Asian immigrant workforce. And the bosses on those plantations, again, who are all white, they treated the workers differently depending on where they're from, what language they spoke. They paid them differently. They kept people in segregated camps. So like Chinese workers were here, Filipino workers were here. They did everything they could to illustrate that, okay, you are different from them. You have nothing in common with them. Don't bother talking to them. Certainly don't organize with them. Like, they're not your friends. That was the atmosphere they're trying to cultivate very purposefully. And so when it came time for their union, the ILWU, International Longshore Warehouse Workers Union, probably very familiar to you all out there in the West Coast, they realized, like, okay, we can't let them pit workers against one another. That had been a tactic that was used in previous struggles and previous strikes, where Filipino workers were used as strike breakers when Japanese workers went on strike. They pitted ethnicity against ethnicity. And this time they're like, okay, we can't do that. We can't let them do that to us. And they got over those barriers by being very simple and very human in their intentions to connect. They brought in translators and made sure that folks could understand what was happening and felt heard and felt like their voices were being valued, and broke down those linguistic barriers. They had workers come in and set up strike kitchens, and different workers from different places would cook for one another and share recipes and share cuisine. They connected on such a human level, and they built solidarity in a very real way. So when it came time to hit the bricks, it came time to strike, the bosses were not able to tear them asunder. And the strike was really successful. They got a big raise, like their highest in 20 years. They took on these big five sugar companies, which are like, it's like going on strike against like Twitter and Apple at the same time. Like, it was a big deal. And they won because they worked together. And that's something I do have a tendency to like veer into union meeting slogan talk, but I mean, it's true though. Like, solidarity is our greatest weapon, and there's a lot of examples of that. There's a lot of examples of that happening, and workers using that successfully throughout the book, throughout labor history, and lots of other people's books. It seems like such a basic principle, but workers have been sort of made to feel so isolated and alienated and kept apart from one another in so many different ways, that it really is incredibly powerful when they're able to come together and see one another as equals, see one another as, friends and comrades, or at the very least coworkers, and think, okay, maybe there's something we can do together. And that's kind of the whole thing. That's the whole game, right? We're stronger together, we're more powerful together. And that's how we win. That's how we did it before, and that's how we'll do it again. And I will rein myself in for now. I had a whole talk written out, but I've just been freestyling because I'm excited to talk to you guys. So thank God this is recorded. I'm gonna have to transcribe that later. But I'm gonna wrap things up with a little reading about one of my favorite people in history, who is pretty local to y'all. I know not everyone's in the same place, but at the very least, shout out to Oregon and Portland and the West Coast and Washington, whole zone, love it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Dr. Maria Key, who during her lifetime was at one point known as Portland's Queen of the Bolsheviks, which is like, talk about a Twitter bio. And that's in chapter 4. And I read about her in the context of talking about other, specifically wobbly organizers, like IWW organizers from marginalized backgrounds who were persecuted, who were maybe not as famous as Big Bill Haywood or Elizabeth Gurley Flynn or Joe Hill. Shout out to all of them. But just were really incredibly impactful and interesting people. And I'll tell you a little bit about my girl Marie. So, and this is coming after a section on Ben Fletcher. You should totally read Professor Peter Cole's book about him, Ben Fletcher, The Life and Times of a Black Wobbly, if you get a chance. But so, Oregon's Dr. Maria Key was a former teen textile worker who became a highly respected doctor, known for assisting the poor and unemployed, administering abortions to those who needed them, and throwing herself wholeheartedly into the struggle for women's suffrage. Key was also one of the Pacific Northwest's most prominent lesbians, and held true to her principles even when it seemed like the entire world, or at least the entirety of the US government, was against her. One of her first appearances in the Oregonian newspaper concerned her publicly horsewhipping a boss who'd withheld wages from one of her romantic partners. And that was only the beginning of a long public reign that earned her the moniker Portland's Queen of the Bolsheviks. Key took special care to ensure that the most economically disadvantaged women would be able to access her services, pioneering a sliding scale model in which rich patients were charged more to subsidize the cost of treating poorer ones. As a lifelong outsider, she was unbothered by the social stigma and potential legal implications surrounding her work. Her friend Lou Levy once explained, "She did most of it for nothing because working class women needed it. If they could, they paid. If not, not." Her abortion work placed Aki at odds with many of her cohort in the progressive movement, and she gradually found herself drifting into more radical waters. When women workers at a fruit cannery on Portland's east side walked out, she was called to one of the workers' homes to render medical attention. It was the height of cherry season, in which women were expected to work for 5 to 8 cents an hour in filthy conditions. When 200 of them walked out in protest, the ensuing battle became one of the Pacific Northwest's first strikes led by women workers. As the key passed by the picket line en route to a house call, she recognized several of her former patients among the strikers. When they invited her to join, she hopped up on a barrel and began to exhort the workers still inside the plant to come out and join the strike. The initial protest turned into a full-fledged labor battle, and the Key's commanding presence became a fixture on the increasingly volatile picket lines. Local police grew more emboldened as it went on, charging the strikers on horseback as the women faced off against them in the streets. The Key herself got wrapped up in the violence, once nabbed for stabbing a policeman with a steel hat pin, and found herself radicalized by the walls the cherry pickers found themselves pushed up against. The final vestiges of her faith in liberal government reform fell away, and she was reborn a revolutionary. "I started in this fight a socialist, but I am now an anarchist," she proclaimed. "I'm going to speak where and when I wish. No man will stop me." That commitment to free speech was a defining aspect of the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World's, activism in the 20th century. Unlike modern interpretations that have been twisted by subsequent generations of bad faith right-wing reactionaries, the Wobblies' definition of free speech was simple and served as a defining plank in their organizing strategy. They fought for the basic right to speak in public, to stand on their soapboxes and spread their message of industrial unionism, anti-capitalism, and the one big union to whoever wished to listen. Under the First Amendment, this should have been a moot point, but as these free speech fights exemplified, there was and still is a yawning gap between theory and practice when it comes down to who is actually allowed to exercise that right. Before the advent of television and radio, soapboxing, setting up a literal box to stand on while speaking to a crowd, was a popular means of mass communication used by politicians, actors, preachers, and activists alike. Major free speech fights broke out in Spokane, Washington, Missoula, Montana, Kansas City, Missouri, Sioux City, Iowa, and San Diego, California, as well as in Portland, Oregon, where the IWW caught wind of the cannery strike and showed up with soapboxes at the ready. It was here that Maria Key's leftist political awakening, her memories of a working class childhood, and the scars of systemic inequality she saw etched into her patients' bodies each day fully crystallized. She threw her lot in with the Wobblies, and while the cannery strike failed, the movement writ large gained a giant. When the US entered World War I, the Key's fiercely anti-war stance set her apart from her peers in Portland. But as per usual, she rejected the calls to moderate her message in the face of public disapproval. A pro-war parade saw Key join uninvited, incendiary banner in tow. Prepared to die, working men, J.P. Morgan and Co. won preparedness for profit. Those bold actions earned Key a target on her back, one that would ultimately land her in the same hot water that had burned Ben Fletcher. On May 16, 1918, President Wilson signed an amendment to the 1917 Espionage Act aimed at further curtailing dissent against the war. The silencing summer that followed saw Key snatched up by police on June 30th, 1918. The same day, fellow Wobbly and socialist labor leader Eugene V. Debs was taken in for sedition. The state devoted considerable resources to secure a conviction for Key, and her trial saw the worst of the era's homophobia and Red Scare hysteria. Key was determined to fight back on behalf of free speech, herself, and the right to live as one prefers. She launched a lengthy appeal that freed her to continue her work and set the stage for her last hurrah, an armed confrontation between the IWW-backed striking shingle factory workers and vigilantes hired by factory owners in Everett, Washington, that left 5 Wobblies dead and saw Key rush to the victim's aid. Less than a year later, with her appeal dead in the water, Akee began a year of incarceration in October 1920. Though she defiantly told her supporters, "I'm going to prison smiling," the experience left her profoundly shaken. Akee continued to advocate for free speech and workers' rights throughout her life, even if at a lower volume than before. Her last recorded appearance as a labor agitator came in 1934, when a 62-year-old Akee was spotted on the picket line of a multi-union Portland maritime strike. She said her hellos and headed down to the nearby Union Hall to donate $250, more than $5,000 in 2021 currency, to the cause. The workers won the 1934 West Coast waterfront strike, and they remembered her dedication years later. In 1952, after they heard the news of then 80-year-old Maria Akee's death from renal disease, the Dock Workers Union passed a resolution in honor of their old friend. They declared Akee to have been a powerful fighter for the working class, who had braved personal danger and hardships to preserve peace, freedom of speech, and the right of labor to organize. A fitting epitaph for this remarkable woman. That's my girl Marie. I guess I'll send it back to you, Doc.
Thank you so much. Thanks for talking about how you got into writing and for sharing about Maria Akee. I was wondering, and here I'm going to encourage audience members, if you have questions, to send them in the chat to Kat Huber. Why don't we start? And I'd be interested in hearing about your research process. And we have a lot of, I think, writers in the room and folks who might be interested in researching their own stories. What was your approach, and how did you choose, who to focus on, etc.?
Yeah, man, when I first wrote the proposal and set out my plans for research for this book, I was like, man, I'm gonna go to this archive, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go to this library, I'm gonna go there. And this was in March 2020, so I didn't go nowhere. I had to kind of reevaluate my plans on that front and spend a whole lot more time on Zoom and on the phone interviewing people and sources and whatnot. I ended up spending a ton of time at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is they have an incredible archive, a great resource. They had a lot of really cool rare books that some of the librarians would take pity on me and let me take home secretly. But yeah, I read a lot. I read a lot of books and a lot of articles, a lot of journals, every scrap of written material I could get my hands on, really. And I was at a little bit of a disadvantage when it came to finding more academic sources, because a lot of those you can only kind of access if you have an academic email. But luckily I have a lot of friends who have those emails. So I definitely sent out a few panicked texts like, hey, can you send me a PDF of this very specific thing? Or hey, can you send me a screenshot of this specific chapter? So I was able to access some things that way too. And really one of my favorite and kind of most colorful sources was old newspapers and magazine articles. Even just newspapers.com was pretty basic, was such an incredibly helpful tool. That's where I found a lot of the voices in the book, like workers' quotes, and I added a little bit of the color, because when you're reading these contemporary accounts of what's happening, there's a little more drama in there. And sometimes you can find people being interviewed. One of my favorite characters in the book, who is obviously a real person, Ida Mae Stoll, this coal miner in 1930s Ohio, she gave kind of this, not deathbed, she gave a really great interview, an in-depth interview right before she died to a new local newspaper writer. And I got so many cool quotes from there. Yeah, so doing things like that and looking around online, I drew from other journalists' work. I did a lot of interviews. That's always kind of the best way to do it, right? To find out what happened as someone who was there. There's one person in particular I was really glad and honored I was able to talk to, Carol Lay, also known as Scarlet Harlot, who was incredibly important sex workers' rights advocate and organizer in the 70s. And she's still involved in the community. She's an icon. And she's definitely an elder now, and her health is not where we want it to be. So I kind of felt okay, this is that she's giving me some of her very precious time, and I might not get this opportunity again. So I was really glad to talk to someone like her, someone who's literally lived through the entire era I was trying to document. So yeah, I'm a little bit of a magpie, I guess, because as a journalist, you're well trained, you kind of figure out what you got to do is to find every piece of information you can and pull it all together, figure out what actually happened, and put things in conversation with one another and synthesize all that information, squish it together, and present it in a way that is legible and hopefully accessible and hopefully fun to read. So yeah, it was a little bit of a hodgepodge, I guess, but I did a whole lot of it. And you'll see if you have the book, the bibliography alone is like 48 pages long. Like there's a lot of stuff in there. And I do hope that folks will, maybe if they have a little bit of spare time, will read through it and look up the work of so many of the authors and historians that I cite in there, because there's so many cool labor books out there. And a lot of them focus on very specific or narrow demographics or people or moments in time. And my book spans like a whole bunch of like a whole bunch of them. I'm kind of a kaleidoscopic approach, but those like very intense monographs or very intense biographies are so cool. Like there's even a great, even if you're interested in Maria Key, there's a great biography out there. Oh, gosh, I can't remember what it's called. It's in the bibliography, but if any of the people in your book are interesting to you, like please find their biographies, please find their autobiographies. Like this book is kind of like the intro class, right? And like I'm giving everyone who reads it homework to register for the advanced courses and keep it pushing.
Yeah, I love that tip that it's, that it's almost a map that you can go and find.
The treasure hunt.
Yeah, dig deeper if you're interested. We have, okay, now I see we have a lot of great questions in the audience. So this audience member said, I absolutely love this book, and I think your goal of writing a labor history for the people that is accessible to all has been fulfilled. One of the things I enjoyed most about the book was how you decided to organize labor history along the lines of industries, i.e. focusing on a type of work and labor activism over time, mining, harvesting, etc. This was a great way to contextualize our current struggles within their history. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the campaign to organize Starbucks across the country. What tradition do you see this activism as working within? And I'll also put it in the chat.
That's a good one. So I tend to think more in terms of the Amazon labor union when it comes to historical examples, because they went independent. I think about, Dorothy Lee Bolden, the National Domestic Workers Union in the 60s. That's one that jumps out to me. But in terms of Starbucks, that's an interesting one, right? Because they do have the backing of a major union, but that union is kind of sitting like kind of cooling their heels, right? Like they're offering resources and support, but they're mostly getting out of the way and letting the workers lead. I'm trying to think of any specific examples. I mean, you could probably look back to the IWW, who obviously still very obviously like active and doing cool stuff. But even earlier on, like the idea of having that sort of autonomy, like you and your fellow workers, like you're the union. There's a bigger union with a headquarters in Chicago. Like if you need to hit them up, they can help you out, send you some money, send you some legal support. But really, it's just you guys doing it on your own. And I think that's still a model that is, I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm a sucker. Like I have a red card. Like I'm a big fan of the Wobblies in general. And I think that they don't get quite enough credit for their organizing tactics or their history. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what the IWW does and has always done, which is empowering individual workers to become organizers, right? Like I think we've seen that with the Starbucks efforts, like individual workers at those stores, like they're becoming union leaders, they're becoming organizers, they're talking to workers in other stores. When I spoke to, I interviewed a couple of the worker organizers here in Philly a month or two ago for The Nation, and I asked them, like, so are you in touch with people at other stores? Like, how widespread is this? And they said, oh yeah, we have a group chat, we're on Discord, like we're all in touch, we're all talking to one another. Some people just aren't quite as ready to go public. And that seems to me like, okay, those workers are empowered. Those are organizers. Like every worker in that store is an organizer. And that's how you win. That's how you build power, by, placing that power directly in the hands of the people that need it and that know what they need to do with it. That seems like a pretty good strategy to me. And that's probably why we have like 250 plus Starbuckses throughout the country have filed. And I'm not sure how many have won, but it's like a high percentage. Like turns out empowering workers to organize themselves is a pretty good strategy.
Thank you. So we have another question that goes back to writing. You mentioned that you started but didn't finish college, and yet you've become a successful journalist and now book author. Can you walk us through your process of how you got to where you are now in your career? Advice for aspiring journalists and writers would be appreciated.
Yeah, it's been real weird. I am more surprised than anybody that I got to this point. So I'm not, because my family, no one in my family's been in college either. Like it's yeah, I don't want to call it a fluke, but my whole life has been very unorthodox, we'll say. And a lot of that comes from spending most of it in the music business, right? Like I did go to school, and I almost finished, but senior year got dicey and I decided to like go on tour with my friend's band instead. Which is like a brilliant 21-year-old decision, but it actually worked out because I've spent years after that touring with heavy metal bands and running a PR company and booking festivals. And I was always writing. Like I think at my peak, I would be like, hauling amplifiers and selling t-shirts early in the evening, then get back in the van and write a review for Pitchfork and send out a press release for one of my little clients. And like, just kind of the indefatigable 21 to 26-year-old energy. But basically what I learned in college was I didn't take that many like super academic courses, which would be really fun to take now. But at that point, my head wasn't in that kind of game. I was mostly going to basement shows and trying to like, I don't know, drink 40s and get through it. But I did learn the importance of connecting with people and networking and making friends with people that are able to make things happen. And I kind of took that into the music business and was able to build up a pretty decent career there just through first knowing my shit. Like I'm very good at writing about metal. Like that is something I've always been good at. That's the most important thing, right? Know your subject matter, know what you're talking about, be passionate about it, be knowledgeable about it. And I took that into my writing and I, freelance, I pitched everywhere. I did a couple internships. It was really just through connections in that heavy metal community that I got my job at Vice. And that was the first and only media job I've ever had. And I basically got that because I knew a guy. Classic music business, classic Vice. But yeah, once I got to Vice, I actually learned more about like what journalism is and like dealt with editors and dealt with all of the things that you don't necessarily know about until you're in that job, or if you go to journalism school and like learn how to do all that. I kind of came into it completely kind of fresh faced and new because I just only ever written about heavy metal for heavy metal publications. And I guess it was my big break working at Vice because that's when I was exposed to all these different ideas around journalism and research. And like, I learned on the fly basically, and was always freelancing too. And kind of, getting my name out there, building up clips, building up connections, building up goodwill, building up a social media following, which is so grimy to talk about, but that's important too, right? Yeah, it all sort of, it's a very weird path. I don't know that it is necessarily something I would recommend to everyone because I don't know how many labor journalists or heavy metal dirtbag to labor journalist pipeline opportunities there are. But it does, and I don't want to say, oh, it comes down to hard work and good luck and making good connections and making good friends, but that's kind of what it is. And also just when I started writing about metal, when I started doing anything, I was a teenage girl. And I was constantly either told or shown or made to feel like I was stupid. I didn't belong there. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was worthless, except for a couple reasons that were also made clear to me on very, numerous occasions. Like I didn't feel like I was valued or my work was valued. So I resolved to myself, like, okay, if they don't think I know anything, I'm gonna know everything. I am gonna like build up an unimpeachable knowledge base, and I'm gonna get really good at this, and then I'll show them. So I guess spite has a lot to do with it too, right? But even just like I guess that earlier experience with like getting deeply intimately familiar with a subject and trying to learn as much as you can about it and connect it with the other things you're seeing in your life, you're seeing in your community. That was good practice for writing about labor because there's so much there. And even as a metal journalist, my focus, especially after I was out in the world a little longer, like got more politicized, got more radicalized, my work focused a lot on like focusing on marginalized bands and on the problems with the metal community, like whether it's anti-Semitism or racism, misogyny, like that kind of became my niche. And I've taken that viewpoint into writing about labor too. So all that to say, it's been a really weird career that I built up, but being eager to learn and eager to listen and kind of knowing that, like, I don't know, there was always going to be someone who knows way more than I do. And shout out to them. Like, I'm always trying to learn more and listen more. Like, I don't think I'm an expert on anything. I'm just a really big fan and someone who's read a whole lot and cares a whole lot. And yeah, just kind of made it work. Also, I've like always been broke, so I'm not really continuing to be broke does not really faze me. And I have, I don't have people to support. I don't have elders. I don't have, like, I'm disabled, but I don't have major medical conditions. Like, there's a lot of worries that I don't have that a lot of other people do. So I need to acknowledge that too. Like, not everyone can just do this, but I also don't have rich parents or like that kind of social connections. Like, it's been a weird life. The only advice I can give you is what I've said, like, know your shit, care about what you're writing about, be ready to work hard, be ready to be broke, and be nice to people as long as they're not treating you badly. Because there are a lot of people that I remember from earlier on who treated me like garbage, who came knocking 10 years later when I had some sort of power or a position where they thought that I would be someone they should be nice to. And people remember that stuff. So don't be a dick to someone just because you think that you're more important than them or you think you know more than they do. Because eventually someone's going to come along that knows more than you do, and it's not going to feel very good. So yeah, read a lot and be nice.
I think this next question falls into, or could fall into what you've been saying. You said solidarity is our greatest weapon, but you also talked about how at various points unions or union members have supported racist or imperialist policies. Can you say more about the political vision of the excluded and marginalized workers you write about? How do they see the goal and purpose of solidarity?
Yeah, that's like, I guess the easiest comparison or example to give is the civil rights movement, right? Because so many of those important organizers and figures who were part of obviously that specific movement were also part of the labor movement, like A. Philip Randolph or Dorothy Lee Bolden. Like, they organized, they were part of unions, they were part of that whole like economic vision, but they also saw something bigger. Like with the domestic workers union that Dorothy Lee Bolden founded in Atlanta in the 60s, in order to join, you had to show up with $1 and a voter registration card. And that's just such a very simple and effective means of showing like this is an intersecting struggle. Like, our fight for economic liberation is the same as our broader fight for liberation or civil rights or full personhood and citizenship in this country. And it's something that I think is very important to note, especially because you have all these like stupid rich Twitter pundits talking about how like, oh, grad students don't need a union, tech workers don't need a union, video game workers don't need a union. That's just for, coal miners and factory workers, whatever. Like, you real union members don't care about this woke progressive stuff. Yeah, who do you think union members are? like these progressive issues, whether it's dealing with racism, discrimination, sexism, like ableism, like every possible progressive issue that someone can throw at you, that is a worker issue, because workers come in so many different types, like disability rights, like disability rights movement, like that is also part of the labor movement. Like, I get kind of worked up about this because it's just so silly to see this very reductive analysis of who the working class is and what we're capable of. It makes me think of this other specific example in, I think it was the 70s, when the Section 504 protests were popping off, which it's in the book, but a bunch of disabled activists were trying to pressure the government to actually enact some important regulations for this legislation that was basically like the first civil rights legislation for the disabled community. It's a big deal. Government was dragging its heels. And these activists, they occupied a bunch of federal buildings across the country. In San Francisco, they held it down for 26 days. And they're able to do that because the Black Panthers fed them. Local churches came out and supported them. When some of the leaders went to DC to talk to Congress, the Machinist Union showed up with a truck and some rope and was like, all right, we're going to help you guys get there. Because that was before public transportation was accessible. And a lot of those folks used wheelchairs and mobility aids. Like, I love that example because it's such a tangible, it just shows like how much these things intersected. Like the Black Panthers, the union, disability rights activists, like the community, it all came together and they won. Again, like that's how you win, by standing in solidarity with one another, by recognizing people's differences and seeing them as strengths instead of weaknesses. And I feel like I've deviated pretty far from the original question, but that's that's where my head is at in that sense, at least.
We have a question from the labor stories class. How can we make our pieces inspire viewers to make a change and fight for what is fair? Do you have any tips?
Yes. Talk to the workers. Workers' voices are the most important part of any labor story. And I know sometimes it can be a little tougher to track people down. Maybe sometimes it's easier to quote from a union press release, to talk to a union official. Lord knows I've done that too. But the way to make people care about this stuff is not with facts and figures. That's important, that helps. But putting a human face on the struggle and on the suffering and on the resolve behind labor conflicts, behind organizing efforts, behind the day-to-day grind that people have to go through to put food on their table. Like I could tell you, there are 1,000 coal miners on strike in rural Alabama right now. They've been out there for 13 months and they haven't got much attention. They're holding it down. And I could tell you that and be like, oh wow, that sucks, or that's interesting. But if I show you a video of my friend Greg down there, who's a big burly guy with a beard who was injured on the picket lines after a company goon drove his truck into him. And the same thing happened to his wife. And if I show you a video or present a quote from Greg and talk about how his eyes tear up and his lip quivers when he's talking about how important the union is to him and how he doesn't want to let his dad down and how he wants to protect his wife, I feel like you need a heart of stone not to care about what that man is going through and tend to understand that he and 1,000 other workers are in the exact same boat. Like you got to pull at the heartstrings. You got to show up with the blood and the guts and the marrow, because otherwise it's just a business story or an economic story. Like what makes something a labor story is the people. Like it's just like how, what makes the economy run, what makes everything happen in this country, it's the workers, it's their labor, that blood and sweat. Like I feel like I'm like proselytizing, but that's what always stands out to me. And I think that's what makes people care. Because when you can put a human face on an issue and hear the pain and heartbreak in someone's voice, or see the set of their jaw, or like see the way they carry themselves, that's going to make you connect with them on a personal level. And that's how you're going to get people to pay attention.
Great. I think we're going to be wrapping up and looking at the time. So I think this will be our last question. How does your research on labor histories impact or inform your own role as a laborer in the journalist and book industries?
I just wrote a thing about this for Teen Vogue, my latest column. And that was something, and my book doesn't have a ton about, about book publishing itself or about so-called white collar work. That isn't quite where the focus went. But throughout the course of making that, like turning this Word doc into a book, I met a whole lot of people that like were on my team or helping to make this book be a book. And just hearing from them, like, because we would talk like off the clock of this, what's going on, and just hearing the way they would describe the conditions they were dealing with and the stress they're under and the lack of diversity and the lack of clear career paths for folks, like folks stuck in kind of dead end positions for years when they should have been ascending. I just got kind of a crash course in the issues within the book publishing world. And that's why I wrote about it. And that's why I think it's really great that we're seeing organizing, whether at independent bookstores or within publishing houses. Like I know I've heard a thing or two about maybe things that might be happening in that space. That's one of those things I'm gonna keep my eye on. But it just goes to show that like every type of worker, whether you're in an office working on press releases or you're in a coal mine in Alabama, like you need union protections. You probably need to be paid more. Your boss definitely needs to treat you better. Like we're all in the same boat. Some people have, a nicer version. Some people have more people pulling the oars, but it's all us against them. And in terms of how I see my role as a journalist, like I am biased as hell. Like I am not going to be working for Reuters or AP anytime soon, or probably like anywhere. Like I'm probably not that employable, honestly, which is why I'm freelance and why I write books. Well, book. But it was interesting kind of seeing myself as a little tiny piece in the history of labor journalism too. Like I didn't get to write about her in my books. I couldn't quite figure out how to like shoehorn her in. Some people got left off, but there's a journalist from the turn of the century named Mary Heaton Vorse that I take a lot of inspiration from, who was this radical female journalist who was at so many important labor struggles, like right on the front lines. So there's the mine wars, or Patterson Silk Strike, or going overseas as a war correspondent. And her work focused specifically on women and children and people that were the most vulnerable. And I thought that was really great. And that's what I try to do with my work. And yeah, I'm lucky to be here. I know it's a huge privilege to be able to do this work. And it's definitely the greatest honor of my life. And I'm just trying to do a good job because yeah, I can't screw it up, right? Like all of us who are part of this collective effort to preserve and amplify worker stories and preserve our history, like we can't afford to screw it up. That's why we got to keep, doing our best and fighting like hell.
Thank you so much. Definitely, if you don't have a copy of Fight Like Hell, pick it up. Thank you. And we did put it in the chat, but maybe Kat can put it in the chat again, the link to order the book. And thank you everyone for coming. And thank you so much for sharing your background as a writer, your journey, how you did it, and some of the stories from the book, and your thoughts about current organizing. I just wanted to give a quick preview and plug for you can go to, if you're interested in the UW-Bothell Labor Colloquium, you can go to our website, and eventually we will be putting a video of this talk on that website, and you can check it out, and as well as many of the other talks that have been organized. And then next Tuesday at the same time, May 24th, we're going to be hosting a reading and conversation with fiction writer Peter Bacho, Uncle Rico's Encore, Stories from Working Class Filipino Seattle Communities. And then the following Tuesday, if you're in the Bothell area, there will be a final universe gathering from the Labor Stories class. And they've been engaged in a speculative storytelling project, reimagining work, labor, and educational pathways, and alternative and solidarity economies, and everyone is welcome. It's going to be at UW 1060 on the Bothell campus, and that information is in the chat and will be on the website too. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Kim, Kelly, and I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of your day.
So much. It's great. All right. Take care. Cause trouble.